Hello again. My name is Janelle Schuler, Program and Partnership Librarian here at Arlington Public Library. On behalf of the library and our partner, One More Page Books, I am honored to welcome you to this evening's event, The Cooking Gene, a journey through African American culinary history in the Old South with author Mr. Michael W. Twitty. Tonight's presentation is part of the library's Arlington Reads program, a signature author series which brings people together to discuss books and the important topics of our time. During this, the first full week of Black History Month, I can't think of a more appropriate book to feature than one which highlights the culinary and cultural contributions of men and women of African descent in the United States. In The Cooking Gene, Mr. Twitty uses genetic research, historic interpretation, nature studies, and interviews with contemporary voices in food to trace his culinary ancestry and honor the soul of his people's food. What he shares in this memoir is a compelling and enlightening narrative about the history of race, politics, economics, and enslavement. As historian and literary critic, Dr. Henry Louis Gates has stated, slavery has made the world of our ancestors incredibly remote to us. Cultural transmission and the thirst to better know our histories is an ever-present frustration in the Black community. Thankfully, the work of Michael W. Twitty helps restore our awareness of our ancestors' struggles and successes bit by bit or bite by bite, giving us a true taste of the past. Hailed as a much-needed addition to the culinary perspective of American food by Hugh Acheson, The Cooking Gene is a passionately and precisely told narrative which broadens the notions of African American cultural identity. Please join me in welcoming noted culinary historian, award-winning blogger, and 2018 winner of the James Beard Book Award of the Year, Mr. Michael W. Twitty.
DMV is home, and everybody thinks I live in Atlanta or North Carolina, some nonsense. And I don't know why. That's usually the New York kind of answer. You're from North Carolina, right? You're from Atlanta, right? Because, Atlanta, they grow tobacco in the backyard, right? Well, they grow other things in the backyard. Hence Donald Glover. Y'all got that. That's good. Yeah, that's awesome. But yeah, I just at a dinner in New Orleans. It was sold out. 85 people were booked. 105 showed up. So it was for a program called Resistance is Served by Radical Exchange. A lot of R's. The next dinner was Leah Chase and Carla Hall. That was wonderful. That was out of sight. Although, true to Miss Leah Chase's nature, Carla did not escape the switch. Leah Chase went, I love Carla Hall. She's a great chef. Just need to fix that hair every once in a while. I was like, oops, see? I knew that was coming. But it's nice to be home. I just got back. I did a program at the Episcopal School in Alexandria yesterday. After getting off the plane that left at 5 o'clock in the morning from New Orleans. So yours truly. And then I'm going to Detroit this Saturday, and they keep on going, I'm not, can I tell you something? Look, when you're not good for a 9-to-5 job and it's all on you and it rains and it pours, good stuff, no complaints. Grateful, gratitude, complete gratitude. My board of directors, the ancestors are like, you asked for it, now you're going to get it. And it's your job to do it. So that's how we work this. So, this is home, but it's a weird home because it's a very difficult place to explain to people who are not from this strange belt called the DMV. And I'm glad we have a little nickname because, otherwise it's like, I'm from D.C. Where in D.C.? Arlington. Or Ariana was Rockville, right? Or like Temple Hills. I'm like, okay, keep going. Where's Temple? What neighborhood is that? It's not. But apparently, and then I was in Chicago recently, and before the real crud happened, there was the pre-crud, the weather. And I'm walking around there going, oh, you're from Maryland, you understand weather like this. I'm like, no, I don't. Boo-boo, 1 inch of snow on the ground and it freezes, we got out of school. I remember that. That was the best part about growing up in this area. And the better part was when I was a teacher in Hebrew school and I didn't have to make up the days we lost. And so when we got out of school, that was a free day with pay. And all I had to do was sit there and drink my hot cocoa. Especially when I had the all seventh grade boy class were all bad. Oh, I loved every snow day God gave me. Oh, it was best. I used to wear my pajamas backwards, my hat, my kippah backwards, everything backwards. So, yeah, we're a special place. We're also a place that's steeped in a very unique history. We are surrounded, and I think we take for granted that we're surrounded by the Revolution, the early colonial period, Native American history, slavery, the Civil War, segregation and civil rights. We're surrounded by it. However, what's interesting is that the closer you get to the Capitol, the more the obfuscation and erasure happens. Because nobody wants to say it happened here. So when people learn about Frederick Douglass, they go, no, Frederick Douglass was from Louisiana, Mississippi. No, he wasn't. He's from Maryland. Y'all know, right? See, if someone says, I'm from Maryland, like, no, you're not, boo. You just moved from Massachusetts 2 weeks ago. You got to be from Maryland on Saturday during third period and get married and buried with Old Bay. I'm killing you, and I love it. Keep it up. But they don't get the fact that it didn't happen elsewhere. Those places were late to the game in terms of migration and history and time. We forget that when you go to Natchez, when you go to Holly Springs, other places in Mississippi where they have the antebellum pilgrimage, those houses were built 2 seconds before Sumter. That's how recent that history is. I mean, that was the trail in. People were still forging through swamps. The Delta region of Mississippi wasn't even built up during that time period. And for us, we've been dealing with this for now, this year, 400 years. And I didn't realize this until I started meeting student groups from other parts of the country, but come here from Alaska or California on these like big field trips to the East Coast to learn about American history. And to me, it was second nature. And they said, well, why do you guys still talk about this? Because I said, wait a minute, you from where? Juneau, Alaska? Fairbanks? So your history is 1959. Our history is 1619. Get over it. You relearn. Recenter yourselves. There were no black kids on the trip. No kids of color, period. Not even Alaskan natives. And so I'm just like, wait a minute. Do you know Yupik history? Do you know Inuit history? Do you know Kwakiutl history? I mean, come on. Do you know Haida history? I mean, please, enlighten me about how well you know Native history in your region. Or Russian history. You know, since you can see it from your house, I mean, bring it. You may not know where Temple Hills is, but you know where Moscow is, right across the bridge, isn't it? So, I learned a lot in terms of being an interpreter and educator that we don't really know each other. We think we do, and we think that our vote and our opinion counts for all hundreds of millions of people that live in this country. Yet the average American has never really left their region. And it's like, wow. So even for me, the initial project that led to this book was traveling the entire South, the entire Census South. And that's very important because the Census South often gets downgraded as the least workable definition, but it's actually the best definition because it takes into account history. It definitely is outlined by slavery. And it certainly involves migration. Migration is very important. Migration is what's going to change everything. It always makes us constantly dynamic and not static. And that was a driving force behind how I told this story. Because those of you who are genealogy people, raise your hands so I know who's who. Only one genealogy person, please. All of you have done ancestry.com. Raise your hands, genealogy people. Even if you only watch Finding Your Roots. Right? I was about to leave. I'm serious. I don't do timid. I really don't. Well, y'all lying. You're talking about, no, I don't really do that. Yeah, you do. Yeah, all y'all got your pie chart. Stop. Don't play with me. You saw that commercial. Well, I used to wear a lederhosen, now I wear a kilt. Shut up. I used to wear a suit and tie, now I wear a kente cloth, but that's actually true. That's how I got my James Beard Award. I said, I'm wearing some straight up kente cloth from Ghana that I bought in Ghana. I'm gonna I wear every ileke I had, every henny I had, every ring, every cowrie shell. I let them know. I'm gonna share a little, 3 little stories, and I'm gonna dive into the book and what that's about. And we'll I promise you, library, we will end on time. I promise. Sorry for the lateness, but this traffic and accidents. When I was in Nigeria in 2017, after I had finished the first version of the book, I was in eastern Nigeria in the Igbo country in Onitsha. And we had a security guard, as you must have in Nigeria when you were a traveling group. And he was 6'4", and he was a handsome man. He had all these girlfriends on his little cell phone. He was always talking on that. Had a machine gun like that. He was always twiddling with, playing like it was a toy gun. It kind of made me nervous. And his name was John the Baptist, and he was a 6'4" Muslim from Abuja. So we got into a traffic conundrum in Onitsha. Onitsha is a huge place with a huge market, one of the largest open-air markets in West Africa. So the person in front of us was trying to, tell us, you need to get out the way so I can go and do this and do that. So they started getting into a cussing match. And so he lets it go on for about 2 minutes, and he looks at his phone and gets kind of bored and sets the phone down and goes, opens up the bus doors. He's a duck, he's so tall. He walks up the bus, does this, shrugs his shoulders, picks up the gun, and goes, the situation has changed. So that's my motto in life. That was the most badass thing I ever saw in my life. The situation has changed. So when you need that energy and somebody crosses you the wrong way, just tell them, just stare them looking at the situation has, and they're like, uh-oh, I don't know what's gonna happen. So when I received the James Beard Awards, first was food writing, and that was the only award I expected to receive. And there were people in that room who put in print that I did not deserve a voice in the food world, did not deserve a voice in the world of Southern food, that I wasn't. People told me when we were trying to shop the book around, were in that audience, who told me, America is not ready for you. This isn't yours to write. This Jewish stuff, this gay stuff, you're too complicated. You're not in a bubble. You're not in a box. We can't market you. This is impossible to market, impossible. Nobody will ever read this book. It'll just be a waste of everybody's time. Good luck. Or better yet, can you amend your identity? Can you take your kippah off? Can you do this? Can you do that? Can you knock about being gay? Can you just make us comfortable? Just be a black author. Well, I can't help that. Because I am about to tell you, I'm going to stay black and die before I change a thing. That was my grandmother's favorite line, stay black and die. I love that. But I told him, I said, are you kidding me? America is the only place where I'm possible. And how dare you take that one thing away from me? So I let it go. And so when I got up there, I wore those clothes for a reason, because if I lost, my ancestors still had my back. If I won, I was going to show them how I won. And when they said food writing, I couldn't deal. I fell out the chair, literally. And then when I got to the book of the year, I was like, okay, whoever this is very nice, we'll clap for him. And then the more detailed, I knew it was me, and I looked at Toni Tipton Martin, author of the Jemima Code, and she flipped out and I flipped out. And it was really validating. And I want to tell you, if you're an author, if you're creative, and people have told you, put roadblocks up to you, please don't ever fear those roadblocks. Those roadblocks are roadmaps. Because when I was told you can't be all these things and be a food writer and do that, I said, okay, great. So we're going to have a trilogy of books First one's going to be African American centered, the second one's going to be Jewish centered, third one's going to be gay centered, but they're all going to be all of me all together. And I'm going to show you what America is. You're going to learn today. So when we talk about that, when we talk about intersectionality, it is not some dastardly word. Ever since 1500, maybe we can go back even further. I mean, I know history nerds, we can go back further. But why do I say 1500? Because that was a year in which things happened at a more rapid speed than ever before. You know, we were already plans to bring us as Africans to the New World and enslave people, not as explorers, not as individuals, not as our own efforts. Let's make that clear. People were dying of diseases from far and far away they'd never even heard of, didn't know existed. I mean, that's what it really means to be global. When something affects your life, when some new crop shows up and you don't know where it came from, or some new words show up or something else, and it's like, wow, that's like, oh, it almost like descended from the sky. And then within 100 years, everybody knew what was up, right? Because those caravels and slave ships and mercenaries and pirates and missionaries and travelers and colonists and people who were under punishment, who were exiled, and other people were exiled because they were enslaved. Started crisscrossing the globe up and down and left and right. And the genes started to mix. And the stories. And new cultures developed. And new people. And new polities. And new politics. And new world orders developed that were beyond the control of 99% of the world's population. How incredibly amazing and terrifying. And it was in that womb the African American people were born. We are looking at 300 years of African presence in Louisiana, 1719 to now. We're looking at 400 years of African presence in British mainland North America. And I saw some pushback article talking about that wasn't the first. Yes, I know, it was 1526, it was in South Carolina. We were the first non-native people to permanently settle here because we revolted against the Spanish. And they said it privileged the Chesapeake, and I said, yeah, you're damn right it did. I mean, you can't, what do you mean it privileges? You know, Bermuda, all respect to my Bermudian cousins, Bermuda had the onion. We had tobacco. You know, Virginians, we had to say tobacco. We had the crop that basically paid for the freedom of America through the American Revolution. We paid France our debts back in tobacco. Tobacco was the crop that made the Southern plantation a lucrative institution that swallowed millions of lives. Yes, I'm privileging the region my ancestors came from because I see in our social media such a downer at us as African American people. And one thing this project taught me was two things. One was a deeper appreciation of love of myself as a descendant of Africans, and that we are one African family. It does not matter where the boat dropped us off, it's where it picked us up that bonds us and creates us and makes us one people. Whether we're Brazilian or Haitian, British Caribbean, Spanish Caribbean, Spanish mainland, African American, British European, Creole, Pidgin speaker, Patois speaker, we're the same people. We are cousins, we are blood to each other. We owe it to each other not to demean each other's cultures and where we come from. But on the second note, it made me extremely proud to be an African American. We rocked this shit like nobody else on the planet. And we did it because, not in spite of the fact, we were Congo and Igbo and Yoruba. There was a time in my life when I couldn't tell you what I was, when I had absolutely no clue. And I know there are people here who may be a little bit cautious or skeptical of DNA. But the whole purpose behind that part of the book was saying that when you take historical documentation, names, health concerns, like for example, sickle cell, when you take into consideration what Africans were brought to what parts of the country, that's very important. That not everybody was brought everywhere. And not everybody was brought everywhere in equal amounts. So that's really critical. So if, for example, Haiti, heavily from the Benin, where I'm actually taking a second group of African-American chefs who've never been to West Africa in a month. Those of you who contributed to our GoFundMe, thank you. Those of you who haven't, there's still time. Culinary pilgrimage to West Africa, I'm not joking. But Benin, Congo, was now Nigeria, Yoruba country. These are and then Senegambia. I mean, those were who created Vodun, who created the Haitian food culture. In America, it was everybody, from Benin in Louisiana to people who came from Sierra Leone, Liberia, and South Carolina, people of Congo descent in the Carolinas, all through Louisiana, and people from Nigeria and Virginia represented over 50%. Nigeria and Cameroon were over 50% of all delivered Africans. And if you consider the fact that Virginia was the colony, then Commonwealth, that had the longest sustained black population and more black people than any other state, even when those black people were a slight minority, and that when those black folks were sold away during the largest forced movement of human beings in American history, which is not the Trail of Tears, but the domestic slave trade, and think about the number of descendants, people who ran away or sought their freedom in the North and Midwest, and that Virginia was 2 states, used to be 3 or 4, right? The whole block was Virginia at one point. Think about the impact. Think about how many people came off a boat from Nigeria and were the ancestors of somebody who ended up in California or Chicago or Boston or Canada or back to Liberia. That kind of thing fascinates me. How one life, how one woman, how one man could be the patriarch or matriarch of an entire dynasty of people who beat the odds every single time they drew breath. That's what gets me. Because when you go to the slave castle in Ghana or Nigeria, wherever, it's very different from going to a plantation. When I cook on a plantation, you know, there's that hurt, there's that pain, there's that angst. But there's also this idea that people got on with their lives despite all the hurt. And that you know that at the end of the day, they made it off. Because we are the end of the story, right? The fact that we can look back as free people who can read and write, who can vote. Well, most of the time, we got to fix that. And other things. I mean, you look back at that and you go, okay, I know how the story ended. But when you go into the bowels of Gorée and the bowels of Cape Coast, and you reflect on the fact that your grandmama and granddaddy did not have to do this. People who are in trauma don't owe us anything. People in trauma can just close their eyes and will themselves into death. It's not hard. Not hard at all. Don't eat. Just stay there. Don't drink. Swallow your tongue. Take poison. Force yourself to get killed. Stop breathing. Bang your head. That's what they did. Except for the people we come from. They kept drawing that breath and kept thinking, I got to keep breathing. I got to keep living. I got to keep doing this. I felt it down in that bowel of that slave castle. Realizing I come from kings and queens of spirit. And those women and those men did everything they could to resist through breathing and living and surviving. And they had to not only beat the castle, they had to beat the Middle Passage. They didn't just beat the Middle Passage, they beat exile in America. They lived to make children who made 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 me. That's how this country was built. And it is a damn shame that the world don't know it. We're not the least of these. We should have been the greatest of these. Just imagine if 1776 rolled around, everybody said, okay, fine, independent, everybody's independent. Or when the Constitution was being crafted, you know what? This doesn't work. This is hypocritical. Let's just stop it. Let's cease taking native land. Let's give women the vote. Let's make sure that these enslaved people are free. You talk about making it great again, child bye. That's how it should have been. So my hat, which is gonna be made in this country, by the way, will say, "Make make America what it should have been." I I like him, but it ain't about him. It's about an entire people who we don't know our neighbors, whether we agree with them or not. We don't know the people, oftentimes people we don't agree with the most, or the people we are blood related to. We don't understand that we are a family. We are a dysfunctional ass family, but we are a family, especially us Southerners. And those genetic tests will reflect something that from every generation from here on out, we will be bonded and connected, generation to generation. It won't disappear. It's not going to go anywhere for a long time to come. So it's really critical that we understand how we're linked, what connects us, what links us. How are we possible? Food is one of the most important ways. And a lot of people are kind of like taken aback by the fact they'll come to the presentation and they won't hear a lot of like cooking techniques, and that's not really not what it's about. I mean, I understand why they're there, but it's kind of like, okay, boo-boo. That's part of it, but that's not really where it's at. First of all, most of my cooking skills can't be applied in the modern kitchen. What am I going to tell you? First get us some red oak logs, and chop them this thin, and then get a little bit of cotton, little pine needles, and then what the hell are you talking? I'm telling you how to make a fire. Get your cast iron pot, make sure there's no mouse scat in it. I mean, duh. So, no, that's not what it's about. The food tells you the story of the people. Let me give you one ancestor story. One. And by the way, this is constructed through years of imagination and this is basically the truth. But there are certain things that are missing. Because when you do anybody's history, especially the history of people who are agrarians and peasants, our history gets lost first, no matter where you come from. Everybody in this room comes from enslaved people on every continent on earth that was inhabited by human beings. Every one of you. But what makes our story unique is that our story was racial chattel slavery, and we were never supposed to leave it as an institution. That's what makes us unique. But I don't want to fool anybody. Everybody in this room comes from serfs, enslaved people, servants, people who were under the paw of somebody else. But what makes our story unique is the fact that we were the only ones in world history that did not completely assimilate. Part of it was that racial chattel slavery prevented that. It said, no, you're different, distinct, you're not even human. Okay, great. So we're going to create our own civilization over here, and we're going to make it so tasty, so popular, so sexy, you're going to spend the rest of your natural life, spend every dollar you can get, try to be us. That's the curse. Everybody want to do what? Sing our blues, but they don't want to do what? Live our blues. So they do that in Brazil. They do that in the Caribbean. Do that in England, the mother country. They want to send us back, but they ain't got no modern culture in Britain without the Caribbean man and woman. They do it right here. So we have to interrogate. Why was Robert E. Lee's favorite food fried chicken and black-eyed peas? Why do you say that the black-eyed pea was the savior of the Confederacy? Why was Thomas Jefferson equally in love with black-eyed peas, but also loved guinea fowl was his favorite meat? Guinea hens came from West Africa on slave ships. Washington loved hoe cake. That was his favorite breakfast. That was the hardtack of slavery. He could have anything he wanted, but he wanted the same food his enslaved population ate 3 times a day. You got to ask yourself these questions. Why? Why do we have $1 billion industry in Southern food? Who created that? Where's the Pacific Northwest restaurant? Great food. That's some good food. Where is it? What about New England? Don't say Red Lobster. I'll hurt you. What about California? Don't you dare say CPK. And Southwest? Chipotle and Taco Bell. Nope. Not at all. But Southern food, through fast food, through chain restaurants, through local institutions, you have to go there to get the food. That's the most important regional American food industry. And we know who crafted that food. enslaved Africans, Africans as cooks for armies, Africans as free men of color and free women of color, Africans as tavern owners, Africans as restaurateurs, Africans as caterers, Africans as people in mixed households of various classes. They were the conduits. They were the people who moved these various traditions from across the world into one Southern cuisine. They blackified it and they made it taste better. So that's what we're talking about. So the question is, how do I fit into that story? As a culinarian, as someone who loves the same food tradition, who sees it beat up left and right every week, where are the black chefs? There are no black chefs left. Where the soul food's gonna kill you? Every week, treating our culture as if it's a pathology instead of a tradition and civilization. Constantly trying to take its nobility away from it. This is, to me, just as noble as hip hop. Well, hip hop is incredibly noble, despite its faults. It's magical because it's given it's now, a senior citizen religion. I didn't say art, I said religion. I said people who invented it are now, ARPH. But that was once the story of the blues, right? And jazz and country string music, which became country music. Country string music was the fiddle and the banjo as played by black and white musicians in the South. And the banjo comes from where? West Africa. You got it. We can't escape this. We are a family to each other. At the risk of sounding incredibly gay. For you. My sister. You can take the boy out of pride. You can take the pride out of the boy. Hello. So one of the things that we talk about is that how do we trace people's lives? It's very hard because it's a mosaic, right? Sometimes in black genealogy, you'll get everything you want. No, you won't. You'll get most of everything you want. But sometimes it's at the cost of really having someone else's history. The more Europeans you have in your line, the more information you get. It's the fact. The more connected you are to the continent, the less you get. DNA helps us fill in some of the blanks. For example, who we're related to in America who were split from during slavery, which is very important. Who we were related to in the black diaspora who were split from, very important. But also who we came from in West Africa, very important. With the caveat, I did a whole caveat chapter, where I talked about how, this is how I'm approaching this information. I'm being very cautious, but I'm using this information in such a way that I feel confident. I didn't come here to be bland. I didn't come here to be West African. No, there's no West African. There are Mende people, and there are Mende people with different dialects and different villages and different polys within Sierra Leone and Liberia. Okay? I'm well aware of that Africa's not a country, thank God, and that Nigeria is not the country they came from. They came from their various polys they lived in during the 18th and 19th centuries, blah, blah, blah. I had to say that because as a black author, I got to be twice as good to be just as good. And I knew people could come from me if I didn't spell it out. That's what they did to Alex Haley. Alex Haley was not a historian nor a genealogist. He had a lot of friends who helped him research his book, and sometimes they took their information from other people's books that were fiction and then gave it back to him as if it was historical text. So he worked off of the model of James Michener, who would often sort of parallel historical text. But James Michener was never accused of being a historical plagiarist. Alex Haley was. So they questioned his genealogy and questioned everything else about him. And I said, I ain't going out like that. And I started this book. I actually went to Alex Haley's grave and I said, look, we're going to do some libation straight up. I don't know how, I don't know what, but I seriously need some help here. This is the hardest thing I'm ever going to do in my life. And I need you to guide me. I need you to get me back to the continent. I need you to let me see the village, see my village like you saw your village. And I want you to help me change the world. And that was a really solemn afternoon. Drove all the way out to the porch where he was told those stories. He's buried right there in the front yard. Went back, I was quiet the whole way. It was like a ritual moment for me. So we talk about these ancestors, and I want to introduce you to a woman who I call Mama Wave. Mama Wave is not her real name. Mama Wave is Mende for like, kind of like Big Mama, kind of like ancestor woman. And I named her that out of the spirit of, you know how we name, Lucy and all those other people, right? Well, Lucy wasn't her damn name. So, I don't care how high you get and how many Beatles songs you listen to. Nope, that wasn't her name. And so Mama Wave wasn't her name, but it's an honorable name because she told me, that's okay with me if you name me that. So she was born approximately in the 1750s. And she had about, 18 to 25 years in her native Sierra Leone. It was called Sierra Leone at that point. She was Mende. She was initiated into the Sandi. The Sandi was a secret society for the women. And that meant that she had to learn how to dance the Sandi mask and the various rituals that were part of womanhood, how to cook ritually, how to cook for her husband. She was given advice by the elder women. She was rehearsed in the rituals of rice farming, which was essential to the Mende people's life. Rice has been grown in West Africa for 4,000 years now, several indigenous varieties, and then Asian rice has been grown there for about 2,000 some years. She is captured in a war with the Fulani, who are also part of my blood, but from a different part of the continent, and in a jihad, and she is delivered into the hands of the English. The English enslave her at Bunce Island. It's the first time she sees white people. She's probably scared out of her wits, does not know what's going on, where she is. She's seeing Loco and Crew and Vai and Timne and Fula and Minde and Mandinka, people around her, people who she kind of understands some of the words, but doesn't really, mutually intelligible languages. Then they brand her with her ship's name. They put her on the boat, on a canoe to go to the big boat. The big boat is taking her to a place she's never heard of, and she doesn't know she's going to anywhere. She thinks she's going to be eaten. She thinks that she's going to be cannibal food. In a couple of days, she figures out that's probably not going to happen, but she still is not aware where she's going to go. She's been told that, sometimes the Europeans take black people to Europe where they freeze to death. But she really doesn't know what's going on. When she's on top of the decks, she is constantly being harassed by the male sailors. It is my opinion, which I have not fully established yet, that she was probably pregnant by the time she arrived in America because of some of the phenotypes and things that I've noticed in my relatives. It's like, and some of the DNA connections come from Australia and other places. So we're talking about somebody who was around the world. And that often happened. We forget that the violation of women, black women, began long before they hit America, long before. And when she was, on top of the deck of the ship, she was also forced to cook and make the food. They made something called slabber sauce, which was whatever your local staple was, rice, yams, corn, whatever it was, with palm oil, hot peppers, and whatever fish they could catch, or smoked fish. They would just make a mass of it up and feed it to the enslaved people who were on the deck below. Their hands were never clean. They were getting constant dysentery, cholera. The boats were full of lice, rats, filth, unbelievable filth. She gets to Charleston, South Carolina, where she becomes human gold. She's probably sold by Scramble, which is one of the most horrific ways you can imagine being auctioned. Scramble means that if this was a scramble auction, we would form a circle. Those of us who were being enslaved people would then be chased around by our future slaveholders or their overseers and would be tied with cloths and then brought to the auctioneer and then bid off on. So you got the pick of who you wanted. If she was indeed pregnant, she probably would have been very valuable from the get-go. Black women and black men from the Rice Coast were number one choice after 1739. 1739 was the year of the Stoner Rebellion. So I have Congo ancestry from Sundi. So it's another part of my roots. So in other words, what I'm trying to tell you is that if you are a person of African descent, which doesn't mean you're black, or if you're African American, Afro-Caribbean, Afro-Brazilian, the chances is that your ancestors weren't a one-time event. Think of it that way. Some of them were here very early. Some of them were here, they trickled in later. And then bit by bit, people started coming into the family tree until very late. Virginia, that gets cut off around 1800, even if not before. Probably about the time the revolution stops, no more African entry. If you're from the Carolinas, Florida, Georgia, Louisiana, you have African blood going back to illegal importation of Africans. I know I do. So my grandfather has a cousin. Grandfather, blessed memory, died last year. I met my cousin through him, and they were only 5 generations removed, which meant that whoever that ancestor was showed up after the slave trade was already illegal in South Carolina, which was frequent. I mean, they just brought them in at night, sold them. All of a sudden, there were these people. And can you imagine what it would have been like to have been one of the late importations? And you're surrounded by these people that look like you, but they don't know who they are. And you don't know how to fit in. And they don't really like you because you represent to them something they've been told is horrifying in the past, and they're already culturally removed from you. And yet you have so much in common with them, and you can't even have the words to explain. I'm just like you. But eventually those people will marry into those families and become part of our genes. Now back to Mama Wove. Mama Wove is valuable because it only takes 2 successful rice crops on a plantation to make a South Carolina planter a millionaire. They are the finest dressed. They are the most educated, the most cultured white men and women in America. They have the first public library and the first this and the first bookstores and opera house and theater, all built on the slave trade. The men are the crafters of the land. They move more land in the Carolina Low Country than is used to build the pyramids. And from outer space, you can still see the levees and the ditches and the dams that were used to flood the rice fields in season, which is a mathematical process as well. The women are the rice processors because everything was kind of done in age grades and gender grades. I do this, you do that. I do this, call and response, right? You do this labor, we do this labor. We'll do this labor, we'll do this labor. And it's not based on strength, it's based on mythology. It's based on religion, based on spirituality. I assure you, it takes strong arms to lift and pull down that old-fashioned African mortar and pestle. That's some arm exercise there. So it's not about who's stronger, who's weaker, just an issue of all cultural conventions. So because they were so excellent at processing this rice, the women from Senegambia and Sierra Leone and Liberia, the rice coast, created this rice culture dynasty from Wilmington, North Carolina, all the way south to Jacksonville, Florida, and inland. And also in the Louisiana, the lower Mississippi River Valley, throughout Louisiana as well. Mama Wove will have a daughter. Her daughter remains nameless. Mama Wove's daughter will have a daughter named Nora. Nora will be born approximately around 1800 to 1810. Nora will then have a daughter named Hester. Hester was born late 1820s. Hester will have a daughter very late, after having many children, around 1870, named Josephine. Josephine will have a daughter named Mary in 1896. Mary will have a daughter named Hazel in 1925. Hazel will have a beautiful daughter named Patricia, born in 1948. Patricia will have a son named Michael in 1977, and that's how I became an American. That's our story. That's one life. That is not the life of Elijah Mitchell, born on a tobacco plantation in Virginia, who saw the emancipation. And I wanted to tell each one of their stories in a food context. So I tell his story based on the fact that he was at Appomattox, he was enslaved in Appomattox County, and saw the surrender, was what we called it. And he saw the surrender the time the apple trees were in full bloom. And it just happened the fact that the surrender happened on the eve of Passover 1865, which is even more remarkable. So yeah, it was important for me to incorporate all those different identities into this narrative because they all kind of like made it live a little bit more. They made it like, scintillate, all the little details. These people were basically passing each other, in ships. And the way I look at the genealogy and the genetic stuff, it's fascinating to me that I have a lot of friends of mine who I had no clue. I said, wait a minute, we're cousins. We're really relatives. When I went to Nigeria, of the 12 of us that went, 8 of us were related both on our African and American sides. It was just like, okay, I get the message. And one of our folks, James, who's an incredible Masonic scholar, he found out through his genetic test that his childhood friend from Nigerian American childhood friend, him, were extremely closely related. And so he called him and said, wait, all that time, we were best buddies, we were also blood cousins. So this is doing amazing things for us as a people and as a family, but it's also challenging when you involve people who have slave ownership. Because very rarely did I get a total shut you out. I did get some of those. But it was really hilarious when somebody would say, well, I need to check your tree. Really? Really? I told you my people remembered every name. We didn't need Maury Povich. We'll waste your time. You are the daddy. Come on. I'll take the reparations check as child support. Don't get me started. And I mean, we remember the names and people's faces, and we understood why so-and-so looked that way. And when I started to see the pictures of these people, it was just it blew me away. Daguerreotypes and photographs, and it's like, damn, this is deep. Slavery was not some job program for the uncivilized. No. It's the fact that you can look into the mirror 100 years later and still see your slaveholder's face and eyes. It's creepy. It's deep. But it's also, you're talking to people and going, okay, so what do we make of this? And people going, oh yeah, I knew you were here. You're a black family. I'm glad you came because I couldn't be the first one to make the overture. I didn't know what would happen. What do you mean know what would happen? We ain't hooked you up this far. No, it's not on you. But this conversation is important. And so it really led me to the idea that I'm really confused as to why we know we have these connections, but yet some people, and I'm not, I'm trying not to be biased, but not an issue of bias, just an issue of just how can you take away the vote or the basic rights of somebody you know is your blood? Not just your damn fellow citizen. They're your blood. They are your actual relative. They are your blood and bone. They are part of your story. How can you do that to someone? So we were too shy to say that during the Civil Rights Movement. We were too shy to say that. We kind of said it right after Reconstruction. But it was like a hush-hush thing. No, don't go there. Well, I'm going there. Because I think we really need to understand that sometimes the people who have the most grief with each other, the most conflict, are the ones that are the most related. And we need to resolve this as a matter of human peace and quiet. Because it's such a dangerous thing when we have sister against sister, brother against brother for no reason. We could be working together for the aim of the good. So this is more than just about food. I mean, I could talk about food all day, and I could talk about all that stuff. And I kind of want to take the next 5 minutes to kind of roll, and then we'll do questions. Is that good? Okay, good. Okay. All right, cool. I'm just making sure. Okay. Okay, cool. All right, thank you. I need to trust that mustard yellow sweater. Yes, honey. I trust that color. So, food. The food and the people have very similar journeys. We talked about rice, but I kind of want to shift the paradigm to something else. Let's focus on that rather than that. So here's how the food part works. In each part of the region of the South, you have different sort of like areas of high settlement. They're not particularly urban. They're rural with kind of like centers of law and commerce. And that's not where the most exciting things are happening. What makes the South interesting is that it's powered by these rural settlements that have a large supply of food from nature, from different parts. So it wasn't like you went there and it was like one vegetable garden. That's a whole myth. Like, no, you planted things where they were the most fecund, like, you know, the sandy soil for the sweet potatoes, for the watermelons, for this, and you put another patch of this over here. And if you planted corn, you followed it by, in the African tradition, which we brought with us, and native tradition, by legumes, like black-eyed peas or snap peas and whatnot. So there's all this shifting cultivation and all these, you know, the fields, the crop that you raise determine the influence in the food. There were lots of indigenous and wild and introduced weeds that were edible, pot herbs as we used to call them. And so those were really important to the diet. So a lot of things that surprise people are things that have fallen out of the common use, partly because they're not, well, we don't do bitter stuff, do we? We like sweet. We like starchy. And then we kind of like divorce ourselves from those flavors in favor of other things. And now there are more people who are interested in dandelion greens or purslane or pokeweed because they know they're healthy. But our ancestors knew that as well. But the thing about it is, you know, every book before mine went, okay, the Africans found some things that were similar, and then they used them and that was it. I'm trying to figure out what they were. So when we talk about poke salad, for example, Photolycus species, I'm like, okay, is this possible this is found in Africa? Absolutely, it's indigenous to Africa as well as the Americas. We forget that Africa and the Americas used to be conjoined. So that's what happens. Any subtropical, tropical plant has its cognate variety. So, you know, to do this stuff, you got to be a botanist, ethnobotanist, you got to be an anthropologist, a genealogist, you got to be, you know, a judge of good character, you got to be Judge Reinhold, you got to be all of them. Only the 80s people after that one. The millennials are like, who the hell is that? Who is Judge Reinhold? Okay. So, you know, it's layers. And I'm glad it's layers. It's complicated. I like complicated. I like being complicated. I like being extra. Because you have to kind of dig through and you basically learn that this is not simple. It's not easy. And it shouldn't be easy. It shouldn't be, you know, as simple as, oh, this people's history is they got tired of using a different water fountain. It's so much deeper than that. You know, what does a water fountain mean to me when a whole other race of people were suckling from your grandmother's breast? What the hell is that? You mean I can nurse your child, but I can't drink from the same water fountain? You mean you'll eat my food with the promise of me not putting ground glass in it for 300 years? Or maybe a chocolate pie every now and then. But you like, no, can't use the same water fountain. That would be immoral. Weird stuff. This slavery and this aftermath stuff, and it's still going on. We know that. We know there's still laws and practices and behaviors that have not changed since this game got started. And with food, we're still there. We still talk about greens and chicken, all that stuff, as if the stereotypes have their own magic. When really, if you start to break it down, it's not in the favor of hatred. It's in the favor of those of us who acknowledge that African piece and saying, okay, everybody lived off this stuff. For what reason? How did all this come together? So at this point, I kind of want to do some dialogue, questions, and you can shut it down what needs to be shut down.
Okay.
We ain't gonna do the Afro-Baptist, Pentecostal, Nation of Islam, Hebrew Israelite thing. We talk all night.
The fellowship all night.
Yeah, the fellowship of the baby lamb and goat. Yes.
So we're going to open up the floor to questions for the next 15 minutes. I know you would love to lavish your love. Got a weird echo going on here with Mr. Twitty, but I'm going to ask that you keep your comments.
Don't testify.
And then if you approach the mic stand, that you approach it with a question. Save the love for later.
Yes.
Early on, you made just a brief comment about social media, speaking against Black Americans. I don't know. Can you elaborate just a little bit on that for me?
It's a whole complex of problems. Number one, it's this idea that you can take 140 characters and school somebody. That you can do a Facebook message and plaster some stuff you got from various unsavory sources and claim yourself writing an academic essay. It's this idea among our own youth that, I remember after Black Panther came out, one of the stars of the movie said, which was a very, beautiful, positive movie for me, for many others, talked about, we don't have any folklore. And I'm like, wait a minute, hold up, boo-boo. And we do. And someone else commented, well, you guys who have this sort of academic background, you have other people don't. And I said, no, brother, we have grandmothers. Thanks. So that is problematic, right? Because it's like it's like this disinformation of generations. Like some people, I realize it's not evenly distributed. But if one person reads that, and it's you college kids, what about those of us who grew up country with 3 Ks and understood all that stuff from our ancestors, from our grandpa and grandma, from our father and mother? I mean, disinformation. Our own people talking about soul food's gonna kill you. Soul food isn't fast food. Black people don't own KFC, McDonald's, or Popeyes. Thank you very much. No, it's not the same. Because lower class people in this country often demur to high calorie snacks to eat does not mean that it's the same thing as their ethnic cuisine. That's the first fact. Second of all, we don't own these corporations. Don't tell me we don't own it. Third of all, that shit don't taste as good as mine. And it's not fresh, it's not organic, it's not sustainable, none of those things. It's not coming from a grower that I trust or from my own ground. The real soul food of any people has to be based in a relationship with the environment they come from. Which is tied to their blood type, which is tied to all sorts of things, their genes, the long-term survival of their particular group. So me eating reindeer is not the same as my Sami ancestors, I have some of those too, ancestors eating reindeer. It's not the same thing. So we have these layers of disinformation, layers of argument, and now it's intergenerational and it's intercultural. And from the other perspective, I saw someone sent me a caption from some museum. I took a picture of it, I put it on social media and said, Michael, what do you think about this? And it was a museum in the South that said that black-eyed peas were only eaten after the Civil War because the Confederate soldiers, watch this, y'all, this is funny. The Confederate soldiers could only they only had the pig's food left, which were the black-eyed peas, and that's how come Southerners eat black-eyed peas. So what's the problem with that? Number one, it privileges who? Men, who are not the main cooks, except, sometimes I tell people all the time that the black male cook was something special, was very important to the economy of food, because we were the only ones considered to be the chefs of color. So we were there. Don't get it twisted. And there were a lot of black gay chefs in the antebellum period too, so don't get it twisted. Furthermore, it privileges white people. It basically says white people were the cause, the source. Black-eyed peas go back in Africa over 12,000 years. Let that sink in. As a domesticated crop, 8,000. They're already being, you can see people in the murals in what's it called? Begins with a T, in southern Algeria, picking the black-eyed peas. Yes. So that's already there. Third of all, what kind of white men from the South? Confederates. So lost cause myth comes in there. So we basically erased and obfuscated an entire people's ancient history with a crop that Robert E. Lee saved the Confederacy. Said save the Confederacy. That's how insidious this is. But it's more than just that. And the long-term success of our people is that we need economic opportunity. There's no better economic opportunity when you control your food supply. And not only that, but control the marketing of your unique food tradition and authenticate it. You're the brand. Your identity is part of the brand. That is no worse, no better than champagne in France. Designated, what do they call them in France? I'm sorry. The designations are based on geography, terroir, nationality, and controlling the product. That's all I'm asking for, is the ability to be capitalist with a little c, socialist with a big S, and tell you where my food comes from and where it's going. And have that be the majority of my people's story, not McDonald's, but that collard green that saved us from absolute death during slavery. You know, that whole corn product that made us grow taller and live longer. That rice that we brought that most of us who are of Gullah Geechee heritage can't even afford today. That's what we're talking about when we're talking about food justice, culinary justice. Next question, please.
Hi, Michael.
Hi.
I was wondering with DNA, so there's a lot been going on, you know, with the, her name just went out of my head. Elizabeth Warren, yeah. And this is one of the family folklore stories that almost every white person has, that some kind of Cherokee cousin, aunt, that's where our nose comes from or whatever. So I just was wondering how that impacts what you think about of how our connectedness is and when people call up to question other people's family stories.
I was thinking about this earlier, partly because I didn't really look at her and go, what a big snafu. I think she shouldn't have gone for the bait. Just left it alone. So it doesn't matter. What West Africa would say, it doesn't matter what you call me, it's what I answer to. Don't answer to it. That's nice. Drumpf. She left it at that. But you know, in this country, Native ancestry went from being a deficit to a positive. You know, and it's more complicated than that. Even he, whose name thou shalt not speak, went after, indigenous people in the Northeast because there was high intermixture with black folks. Same people. Native kinship is not based on what you look like. It's based on language, culture, association, lineage, and acceptance. I mean, not everybody who was part of the kinship was even biologically part of the group. This is really key, really key. The Tuscarora, for example, stopped being Tuscarora and start being Haudenosaunee because of political stuff that's going on. They migrate. Now, the Tuscarora used to be in North Carolina, now in Canada. And they picked up people on the way who were also refugees from the shrinking native territory in the east in the mountains. So we have to really be careful. It's not about her just being a white woman. That's what I heard. But even in Virginia, we have that awful guy. I'm blanking on everybody's name tonight. Who created all the racial laws with Indian? Yep, Walter Flecker, who sits up there and says, you're Negro, you're colored, you're really white. Now you slim, you're Indians. Why? Because what happens when they all get together? Strong people. Look at the Lumbee in North Carolina. Multiracial, multi-group Native people. But they know they function as a successful ethnic group. They control the boundaries of who they are. They have financial and educational institutions. They do what every other ethnic group who has a muscle, what they do, right? They have festivals. They reinforce their identity. And they tell you ain't telling us who we are. We're going to tell you who we are. Well, he didn't want that for the natives in Virginia, and it's still creating strife. But on top of that, I have to ask the question, most Americans don't even understand that to be a recognized Native American group, you have to petition the people who broke every damn treaty with your people, which is nonsense. And then you got to go to a white scholar to verify who you are. I mean, you know what? I mean, that's the whole thing with Paula Deen was like, I get that some 60-plus-year-old white woman from Georgia would have at least once in her life said the N-word or had residual practices of systemic racism that like are in her, infected her brain. But damn, there are more important things to talk about. You know, don't get me started on your current situation. Because I'm a future Virginian, and I got to tell you something. That shit don't matter to me. Whether my people can vote matters to me. Whether our land access matters to me. Whether women have a right to choose, a right to their bodies, and whether LGBT people like me and my partner can get married and stay married in Virginia matters to me. My grandfather, of blessed memory, had to work with Strom Thurmond. My granddaddy knew Strom Thurmond had black children. He told me that in the old days. He said, oh yeah, I knew. But you know what we had to do in them days? We had to work what we had to get what we wanted. And he said, it worked, didn't it? So, I like Elizabeth Warren. And I'm sorry she fell for the trap, but she'll move on. She's a wise white woman. All right, cool. I'm sorry, I'm feeling some kind of way this evening. You know, I ate my Oaties this morning. Got some. Come on.
Thank you for this talk. It's really excellent. My question is about every time you go to the grocery store, I'm assuming this will be in your book, you see Uncle Ben and Cream of Wheat and Mrs. Butterworth and Aunt Jemima. So I was wondering if...
I love how she included Mrs. Butterworth. That's cool. Okay.
So I was wondering what, do you address this in the book? And
yeah, because you know what? I remember when I was little in D.C., my grandmother and I were sitting on the porch, and these two white kids ran by. That's the kind of part of D.C. we lived in, by the way. And they screamed at us, hey, Uncle Ben, hey, Aunt Jemima, and I didn't know what that meant. I knew what those faces were. I knew one thing. My grandmother was this, yellow-toned, gray-eyed, gray and hazel-eyed woman with, who used to have red hair. My grandmother didn't look like no damn Aunt Jemima. And I wasn't old, so I looked like Uncle Ben. I didn't know what they were talking about. I remember my grandmother getting very mad and, of course, throwing the shoe, which, works. It's the Arab, Latinx, and black women's boomerang. And you're done, lay it out. Slain in the spirit, right? Slain in that damn spirit. So, but it was weird, and I was just like, why do these people think how does that mean? And so for one of the things that I do in the book unwittingly is that, I used to go on about symbolism. Well, authors, I used to love that. Mrs. Mockimer in AP English. Authors deliberately no, they don't. I realized that I was answering to all these things kind of like in the background. So there's this whole talk in Virginia about the nobility of the house servants, and how they were the ones who communicated information between the big house and the field quarter and got food and other things back and forth, and how they were this aristocracy and how they were telling the white people how things were going to be. Like every Virginia plantation narrative goes like this. When we wanted to figure out what dinner was, we meekly tiptoed to the kitchen and told whoever, Aunt so-and-so, Uncle so-and-so doing the cooking, what we're going to have. And they said, you can have this, you can have that, you can have the rest, bye. And my favorite one is from Maryland, from Riversdale. Robert, my dear sister, I write you in Belgium to complain about Robert. Whenever I enter the kitchen house, Robert rolls his eyes as if to fall out of his face. And I'm like, I knew Robert. You know Rob was a child, right? He's one of the family because he was like, what you doing up in here? And it's just like so apparent that the power dynamics aren't the same as we assume. But then you know for a fact that slavery was conditional. It was colloquial and discretionary, which means that one story does not tell all the stories. And that some people absolutely had no power whatsoever. Like a servant in Martinique, who the guest at dinner is horrified to note that his host is giddy and drunk and laughing, and then says, oh, I had to get rid of the baker. At which point she takes him to the oven and shows him his corpse. And you go and you shut the book, and you can't do anything for hours. There were a lot of times where I just couldn't write for like a day. I had to go in nature and just meditate and actually talk to that man's soul. And I was like, I'm so sorry. I'm going to tell the whole world that you existed, that you had a life and a reason. And I can't stand the fact that people forget that you're there. Please let me help you. Let me help you have peace. And then there are these figures that were created during the lost cause myth, right? To celebrate the idea of the faithful black servant. So people were more than willing to give us credit for creating their culture as long as we were debased, as long as we were other. So they actually wanted to build I ain't making this shit up, a national mammy monument on the National Mall, like akin to the Statue of Liberty, to honor the faithful Negro and colored servants of the old plantation days. Wow. What do you do with that? But just think about the notion of creating such a monument and how ugly that would have been. Thank God it didn't happen. So, the Depression was good for some things. But yeah, we have a long history with these. The cream of wheat man, for example. I didn't know his story until I wrote about it in the blog, and it was like, I saw this cream of wheat ad, and it goes like this. Note that our cream of wheat cook is such a faithful darky that he sees a flock of turkeys in front of him, and he's not even thinking about stealing them. Like, what? Really? Cream of wheat? You don't even taste that good. You're like wasp grits. Like, what? I mean, but the fact of the matter is, this generation that lives now, multiple generations live now, they don't even realize that it was a point in time when almost every single product was sold with this kind of racial animus, that you couldn't escape it. And what it would have been like for my grandparents and great-grandparents to go to the store and constantly see reminders of people saying, you're not human. And then when you kind of trickle that down through everything else, if you can find the old movie by Marlon Riggs about color adjustment and Black Is, Black Ain't, and these movies about stereotypes, just the fact that we still have these trickle-down images. Every time I see a Popeyes commercial, I cringe. Because other people don't see it, but I definitely see it. I definitely see that, here I am, black woman, giving you hospitality. What are you giving me back, though? For real, what have you done for me lately as the most suffering of this country? And that's how I feel, so I can't unsee these things. But people don't realize that, like, some of these conventions that were meant to dehumanize, or you go to Senegal, and you go, oh, that's where they got that mammy nonsense from. Because the Wolof woman, but see, the mama, she's not beneath. She's the senior wife. She's the guardian of her kitchen and hospitality. Her booty is that way because she's supposed to be beautiful. Made me feel good, because when I went to West Africa, I was like, oh, I can have this and this. And they'd be like, big man. You did big man. How many wives do you have in America? Well, we'll talk later. My brother.
All right, the lost cause mythology. don't
Yes.
know if everyone's aware of it or not. But one of the things I remember is that Donald Trump was running for office. One of the white supremacists stood up in what was supposed to be the Republican, or wish it's conservative. I hate to call Republicans all. But anyway, he stood up and said, "What are you blaming us for? Feeding and clothing you for 250 years?" Does anyone remember that?
Ooh.
So that having been said, since you've done the research, and I'm from a what they call a free people of color family.
Yes.
Got it right. So that didn't happen.
Right.
What sense does it make that we're in the fields all day cultivating and carrying on, but we didn't eat it? So someone's done the research. I've never done it, but I'd like to know about, if you could, I know we're brief, about the kind of gardens and stuff.
I got you. I got you.
And I'm from rural North Carolina. You've been talking about me all day, man. So
I hear that. All right, so I got this.
Last
This is
thing, on that monument in
Yeah.
Arlington, there is a black mammy on that.
Wow.
On which one?
Where is it again?
Go out to Arlington Cemetery. If you look at the, on
How
there,
come I never know? I cooked over there.
go look.
Wow.
There's a monument on the monument on the relief. The Daughters of the Confederacy.
I've got to see it. Okay, that's my next stop. Yeah, we're going to talk, because I got to see this. I got to see this. Because Mary Randolph, the author of the first Southern Cookbook, is buried there. Because she was a cousin relative of the Lees, Jeffersons, Washingtons, all those folks. The Cusses, because they were all, cousin married. We didn't do that. We had what we call a broad marriage, which meant you had to marry somebody from like 5 plantations away, just to make sure. But that's I don't, what, if I had known that would have been the first sentence of that book. Dang. That's so serious. And it's right there in front of our faces, right? It's like in England, we go to the banks, the colonial banks, and they've got the black children effigy with the chains around them. They're telling you right there where the wealth comes from. So to your question, quite a while ago, not a couple years ago, it was a couple years ago, I really mean a decade because I don't want to be old. I was with my dear friend Kathy Thompson, who's since passed away from breast cancer. Kathy Thompson, white lady with a diverse family, had worked in Colonial Williamsburg for 30 years. She said, "Michael, I want you to see how they do this interpretation. I want you to see how not to do." And I said, "Oh, Lord." I said, "Come on, you'll be with me, it'll be all right." So we were on a tour of a particular plantation with the Daughters of the Confederacy chapter. And towards the very end of the tour, the woman is just like going on about the crib of Robert E. Lee, and the women want to pray over it and touch it and starts crying, starts singing the Lord's Prayer. I mean, I'm not making this up. And then Kathy, says, "Wait a minute, what about the enslaved people who were here?" Well, the daughters got real quiet. And docent lady goes, "Well, when Master Carter saw the Yankees coming, he told all his servants," like this is some Downton Abbey nonsense, he told his servants that they should learn how to raise their own crops and raise their own animals. He got personally taught his servants how to take care of themselves. So Kathy is like grabs my hand. I will never know the hand of a woman in labor. But I think I did. She's like crushing. I'm like, Kathy! She goes, "No, that's not how it went down." She gives him a 10-minute lecture. And then number one, Miss Daughters of the Confederacy goes, "Are the windows original?" At which point my internet turner was like, "Got to go. Bye. Nope, I'm done. NEAUXP. So I rolled out. I had to roll out. We rolled out. We were like, "Nope, no more." While they prayed over Robert E. Lee's crib. Even Robert E. Lee was like, "Girl, that's so unfortunate." Buttons. But it's about agency. I'm going to take 2 minutes and I'm going to shut up. We're going to time books. But seriously, it's about agency. People don't understand. Our ancestors didn't get off the boat and have ready-made housing. They had lean-tos made from leaves and sticks. And then they created the cabins. And by the way, cabins, I was told my whole life, "Oh, this was brought by the Swedes and the Finns." Guess what I saw in Nigeria? In Ghana. Log cabin and shack after shack after shack that looked exactly like those pictures of the shacks Afro-Virginians and South Carolinians were living in right after the Civil War, by the thousands. The same construction, the same, shotguns and shacks, yes, both types of housing. And they were just taking pieces of palm and other woods, slashed together or nailed up, or long styled, and then the gardens were always there. So we came with a subsistence mindset. We were looking at the environment going, how can we make success out of our exile? All that stuff. So it's about agencies, but telling our children that no, we were not these people's lieges. We were their caretakers. We were the pioneers. We were the ones who forged trails with native folks. And we were the one who forged trails with Irish indentured servants. And we were all there. We were Jean-Baptiste Point de Sable, who founded Chicago. The man couldn't even live, today probably trying to get an apartment in the wrong neighborhood. Couldn't even live in his own city. So we have to talk about the challenges. Free people of color. We existed. I come from at least several free people. I was amazed to learn that I came from at least one or two ancestors were free people of color who didn't depend on anybody. I mean, it's amazing the agency and the ownership that they had, that they bequeathed to us. Those gardens were about more than they were about resistance. And you realize every time somebody gave you a vegetable and told you the vegetable's name was okra or gumbo, you were resisting complete assimilation. Because now you still have the words. And those words led you back to who you were, because now I know that okra is from Okuru, from Igbo, and I know I'm part Igbo. I know where I come from. Now I have access to a keys to an alternative history that the textbook never would have given me. So yeah, it's about us owning us, but it's also about us extending that invitation to our cousins and going, now that you know how African you are. And that's what also makes you American. Thank you.
If you have enjoyed Mr. Twitty's presentation and presence as much as I have, please stand on your feet and give him a rousing round of applause.